Sir Jim, thank you very much for agreeing to give a talk in air quality management lecture series. Um, this is our 48th lecture. It's a 4th year annual lecture. So we started this air quality management lecture series in the year 2020, October. And the idea of this lecture series is to provide an opportunities for the young researchers, scientists, engineers, educators, and practitioners to understand the latest happenings in the area of air quality management. This lecture includes the experience of the experts working in this area for a quite long time, and it also provides a platform for collaboration with stakeholders and experts in various countries. So these are all our past air quality management lecture series speakers. Yeah, so you have seen that there are 48 phases. Last lecture was given by Dr. Anant Mohan. He's a professor and head in All India Institute of Medical Science, New Delhi. And just to give you with your innovations, ideas in air quality management provided a lot of inspiration in many students and research community. So one such things was we also started in India looking into the Air Quality Management Association. So we inaugurated this also in July 6th, 2022. So it is basically the idea is to enhance the understanding of science behind air quality by promoting knowledge of clean air, understanding best working practices in order to improve the air quality in ambient environment, indoor health risks, and also technological interventions in order to improve the air quality. And also the society can join hands with policy makers in formulating some of the policies that can be implemented in the urban and rural areas. So this is a working with mutual benefits, and also try to see that the professionals will get benefited by participating. So we have as a very young, so we have about roughly 60 membership at present. And this is one initiative which UKRE is sponsored, where Clean Environment for Planetary Health in Asia. So it was funded in September 2019, and this was when we working all of us with a group of from different universities. Then we decided to bring some experience from different countries, understand, and then how we can learn from each other in addressing various environmental problems. So this is one such activities. Then this has helped us in designing this air quality management lecture series. So this network works with a core goal of engage in research, identify what works, strengthen international cooperation, build capacity, and generate resources to continue the cooperation. And we are missing you, but we will also explore whether is there any possibility to have your online talk for this international conference. I'll just reach out to you maybe in the latest day. So this international conference also we started about 8 years back. Again, I still remember the conference which we used to attend air pollution, which is organized by Wessex, which was kind of a motivation for us to start a conference in the similar lines in India. So which was having every year we have a good participation, close to some 200 participants happens, both industries and academia, and of also NGO and government agencies. And this year we are planning it at December 18th to 20th, and venue is our IIT Madras. And I'm very glad actually, and it is a really honor for us to listen to you. We have watched, read many of your articles inspired by your great work in air quality management, and you brought so much improvement in air quality in UK. And Now I'll over to Lakshmi. She will going to introduce the speaker, Professor Jim. Over to you, Lakshmi.
Thank you, sir. Professor Jim Longhurst is an emeritus professor in environmental science at UWE Bristol. His research has been supported by numerous prestigious funding bodies, including EPSRC, NERC, ESRC, and various EU framework projects. He has published over 225 peer-reviewed journal articles and edited 24 books, making significant contributions to air quality management strategies and the design and operation of air quality monitoring networks. In 1984, Professor Longhurst founded the Atmospheric Research and Information Center, initially focusing on urban rainfall chemistry and gaseous pollutants. He has also been instrumental in establishing national public information programs addressing air pollution and climate change. Additionally, in 2002, he co-founded the Institute of Air Quality Management, a professional body dedicated to advancing air quality management practices. Professor Longhurst holds several key positions, including Vice President of the UK Institution of Environmental Sciences, Vice Chair of the Bristol Climate and Nature Partnership, and immediate past President of Environmental Protection UK. He is a chartered environmentalist and scientist, actively contributing to environmental science and management on national and international levels. Today's talk is titled An Updated Analysis of Air Pollution and its Management Viewed Through the Lens of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The presentation provides a high-level assessment of the causes and impacts of air pollution and its management viewed through the lens of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We are honored to welcome Professor Jim Longhurst to today's 48th Air Quality Management Lecture Series. His extensive expertise in air quality management and environmental science promises to provide valuable insights as he delivers his talk today. Sir, we welcome you. Kindly share your screen to start the presentation.
Well, thank you very much. Bear with me while I share.
Sure.
Can I check that you now can see my screen?
Yes, Professor Jim, we can
and
see
it's in sufficient size for you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much indeed for that introduction. Good afternoon to those of you in India, and hello to those of you who may be elsewhere. Thank you very much indeed for the invitation to speak with you this morning and to engage in some discussion at the end perhaps as well. I will speak for about 45 minutes and will, as you heard, speak about the analysis of air pollution and its management through the lens of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is a piece of work that was first undertaken in 2018, and you can see on screen a number of colleagues' names who contributed and supported that initial piece of work. What I'm doing here is updating some of that work 6 years on from its origin. So what I'm going to do is a very high level assessment of the pollution issues viewed through this lens of Sustainable Development Goals. I'll give you a bit of a background to the SDGs, a short overview of some of the literature that is in the public domain. I will then review a Delphi process that seeks to assess the impact of air pollution as a barrier to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, but at the same time look at the enabling contribution that management of air pollution through the air quality management processes might actually enable a more rapid attainment of an individual goal, or indeed the collection of goals. And at the end, I'll make some conclusions and some recommendations for research. If you're not familiar with the SDGs, there are 17 of them covering a wide array of issues that together one might think of as providing the social, environmental and economic conditions for a healthy planet, a healthy population, and one in which the population of the natural world as well as the human world can thrive. But what I'm interested in and what this talk will look at is very simply to ask the question, can we describe air pollution as a constraint on the SDGs, and can good air quality be an enabler? So a little bit of background about the SDGs. There are 17, as you saw in that image. There are 169 subsidiary targets, and these were all adopted by the UN in 2015. And this is described as the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The following year, the UN Statistical Commission agreed a list of 247 indicators. What I'm not doing in this high-level talk is paying a lot of attention to the targets and indicators. I'm keeping it at a relatively high level, focusing principally at the goal level. But these goals came into force in 2016. They collectively provide a framework, a universally applicable framework, where nations, regions, cities and enterprises can assess and plan their contribution to a more sustainable future. These goals are deliberately universal, transformational and inclusive, but they are also highly interconnected. And cumulatively, they describe the major challenges facing humanity. And they are, if you like, a route map to a set of outcomes related to different human needs. And what interesting point is that they frame environmental management as a contribution to sustainable development and move environmental management away from being a simple satisfying of minimal environmental regulations towards meeting a diversity of human needs, which is very consistent with the very important and original Brundtland Commission work on sustainability. And what is interesting is that the goals were agreed as a conclusion of a process involving the 193 members of the UN. They're a successor to the former Millennium Development Goals. And they cover environmental... Sorry, someone has their speaker on.
1 minute, I'll just look at it. Can you all of you, Saket, can you mute, Sarup, can you mute all except Professor Jim?
So one of the things that we would observe is that the Sustainable Development Goals should be considered as an intimately interdependent suite and understood as in a systemic context where all the goals should be seen as interconnected, with the risk that if you have a narrow focus on maximizing one goal in isolation, it may undermine other interdependent facets of the goals. And what we are wanting to do is to explore the barriers that air pollution creates and the enabling opportunities that managing air pollution can bring. Now, air pollution, air quality management, whatever phrasing we choose to use, it is not one of the 17 global goals. But quite clearly, air pollution is incompatible with a sustainable development process, whereas air quality management should be an integral part of a sustainable development pathway. So it is unfortunate there is no goal for air quality or air pollution. However, there are 3 specific targets that cover the health goal, the cities goal, and the clean energy goal. So merely one of the targets associated with each goal, and it isn't clear if the air pollution target is actually a priority. Interestingly, 3 indicators associated with those 3 goals are more specific, but they are just indicators. But the goals provide us with a framework which we can use to consider the barriers to achievement and the way in which researchers like Lode have suggested that the SDGs are an opportunity to tackle air pollution at a global scale, particularly focusing on the importance of air pollution as a health hazard. Everard recognized air as a common good, and that could be argued that clean air should be a universal human right. And quite clearly, in many parts of the world, poor air quality certainly inhibits the development of that right. Here you can see the targets that are associated with goal 3, 7 and 11. They are rather vaguely constituted, but the indicators, particularly for 3 and goal 11, are more specifically, and from an air pollution perspective, you would feel more comfortable that those are manageable indicators where the conventional measurements of air pollution and the medical consequences of adverse air pollution can be used to indicate progress. We also need to note that air pollution is a social justice and global inequity issue. According to the World Health Organization, over 97% of cities with more than 100,000 inhabitants in low and middle income countries do not meet air quality guidelines, but that percentage falls to 49 in high income countries. And WHO data also shows that some 99% of the global population breathes air that exceeds WHO guidelines. And it's in low and middle income countries where that exposure is the greatest. So better management of air pollution can improve social justice outcomes and move the world to a more equitable global system. And of course, WHO recognizes the urgency of addressing air pollution, describing it as the single biggest environmental health risk. Unfortunately, most of the premature deaths that they identify occur in low and middle income countries. So, thinking about the literature that might exist in the field of air pollution and the SDGs, colleagues and I, back in 2018, began to pull together a number of conventional searches using the university search capabilities. And what we were able to find was that there were a number of references, citations that considered the SDGs and air pollution, at least as at a headline level. But when we began to drill down into the abstracts and the papers themselves, it was very clear that the SDGs had been used very sparingly to explore air pollution issues. And we thought at the time that might be due to the relative newness of the SDGs and the time it takes to publish. At the same time, we looked at what the Google Scholar and ResearchGate may tell us, and most of those were the same things that we were picking up through the university searches. So at the end of all of that process of reviewing what the literature searches were telling us, it was very clear that there were very few, if many at all, that were combining air pollution and the Sustainable Development Goals. And that was also true of the annual Air Pollution Conference publications. What we did note from that particular piece of work was that there were a number of publications that were considering In one case, an overview of all of the goals, and in another case, one that was just looking at the SDGs covering poverty and hunger. And what they were pointing out, as you can see on screen, was the very tight relationship that could be found between the goals and air pollution in those specific instances. But these were very few and far between compared to literature that is concerned solely with air pollution issues. So earlier this summer, I updated the search, and using the university library resources, there were now about 984 results of the combined term for air pollution and the SDGs. And there is a word file of relevant literature that can be shared on request. We did also look at the Google Scholar site, searching on the two terms air pollution and the SDGs and air quality management and the SDGs, over 100,000 results in each case. But really, the vast majority of those are irrelevant. And where there is relevance, there was a reasonably good overlap with the UWE library search. So just a few observations. The WHO, who I will continue to reference, see air pollution as a clear marker for sustainable development. And that was one of the phrases we were able to pull out from the original as well as the second literature review. But again, when we look at that 900 plus and the 250 that I looked at in detail, very few publications are considering air pollution and the SDGs as a set of 17 interconnected goals. Most consider just one goal, usually SDG 3, good health, and possibly number 11, sustainable cities and communities. Very few consider the potential negative or positive impact of an action on a non-target SDG or for the system as a whole. There's little consideration of this systematic opportunity for analysis. One thing that was interesting was the European Environment Agency Air Quality in Europe report in 2017 considered the relationship of EU policies with the SDGs, looking at a relationship that directly or indirectly supported 12 of the 17 goals. But their most recent reports in 22 and 24 make no reference to the SDGs. My colleague Mark Everard and I considered the UK local air quality management process in a 2018 paper where we explored the operationalization of the SDGs. And we found a direct benefit on 3 goals and an indirect benefit on a number of other goals, but no consideration in our paper of the negative impacts on other goals for which you were taking action. And then the paper that formed the original basis of this work, where we looked at the impacts and the enabling contribution, but we provided very limited consideration of the targets and indicators. And we've updated some of that today, but still less on the targets and indicators. That is to come. So thinking about the more recent WHO air quality guidelines, there are a number of important contributions that they are making in those guidelines, describing the goals as addressing the public health threat posed by air pollution via specific targets to reduce exposure and disease burden from household and from ambient exposure. Bear in mind, about half of the premature deaths that the WHO identify are from internal household generated air pollution, and the other half from ambient exposure. WHO in 21 also go on to say that this burden of disease and mortality due to air pollution is unevenly distributed. So it impedes progress towards achieving the UN SDGs. But efforts to reduce pollution can have a positive impact on lowering global inequity and promoting the right of life and security by ensuring safe and healthy environments, and that it offers a framework to combat air pollution at a global level. And they, in the guidelines, talk about the connections that 10 of the SDGs have with air pollution, and particularly note that SDG 17, the partnership goal, offers targets that allow intersectoral, multi-level and multi-stakeholder collaboration to address air pollution that equally are aligned with the Paris Agreement on climate change. Very recently, Fuso Narini and colleagues have proposed extending the SDGs to 2050, and they've published a roadmap, which you can read in the Nature article cited below on your screen. They set out a process, but they do not have an SDG or a target for air pollution in their roadmap. But perhaps if their recommendation is followed, it could provide the space to add a specific target, or indeed an additional goal for air pollution. So summing up that literature before going through the individual goals in a little more detail, synoptic scale consideration of air pollution and the SDGs is absent. The majority of papers make very limited reference to the SDGs. Where an air pollution paper does make reference, it is in the introductory text, and very little consideration is given thereafter. Those that do have a more substantial consideration invariably focus on a single SDG. There are no papers that we have yet identified that consider the negative impacts of efforts to reduce air pollution on other goals. In other words, consideration of the trade-off between beneficial action and unintended impact on the other SDGs is absent. So when we put all of that literature together, we then had a Delphi process, which is essentially an expert grouping considering the two questions you see on screen, asking the question of the barrier to attainment and the enabling action of air quality management, looking for direct and indirect impacts. Initially, those 8 individuals you saw on my title slide were the Delphi team. There were 4 iterations of information exchange, where for each of the goals, we asked the question about barrier or enabler. We exchanged information, we challenged ideas, we refuted where appropriate, we disagreed, and ultimately came to an agreement which described the barrier or the enabling opportunity. So that's been updated. Observations made then have been reviewed. Perhaps surprisingly, the outcomes that were present in 2018 broadly remain valid. So thinking about the SDGs and going through them one by one. So the SDG 1 is about poverty. And of course, it is now very clear that poorer people suffer more from air pollution, whilst their emissions tend to be smaller than their wealthier fellow citizens. Polluted environments are much less attractive for economic investments, thus reducing the opportunity for new enterprises and employment opportunities that could lift families out of poverty. Low-income families are most at risk from pollution exposure, as they have the least ability to change their circumstances to avoid exposure, and their health impacts are likely to be more severe, as access to healthcare and medicines may not be as easily obtained. So when we look at this through the Delphi process, we could see that were significant impacts from air pollution on SDG 1, but addressing air quality management will bring indirect benefits for this goal. Moving on to the zero hunger goal, air pollution has direct impacts upon food resources that can reduce crop yields, increase the risk of food insecurity, with nitrogen compounds, ozone and sulfur species being of particular concern. Poorly nourished or low-income families are likely to be most at risk. Eutrophication of lakes and rivers due to nitrogen species in deposition may reduce fish as a foodstuff. Farming practices that encourage the burning of crop residues can impact crops growing in surrounding fields, as well as increasing exposure to farmers and those living in near vicinity. So when we look at improving air pollution, you can see a direct benefit on this goal. Good health and well-being is our third goal, where air pollution is quite clearly a major risk to human health. Impacts on the respiratory system, cardiovascular, increasing evidence of lifetime health impacts. The elderly, the already ill, the very young are those most at risk from exposure. And we now can see evidence of a role of air pollution in neurological and epigenetic diseases. We also see the risk to pregnant women and the long-term impact on the fetus that they carry. So it may also be that physical activity becomes less attractive in polluted environments. So when we pull together the evidence base here, there are very clear direct benefits on this goal from air quality management and a major impact, a disbenefit, if you like, from air pollution. Thinking about SDG 4, education, what we see here is that there are potential impacts for neurological and cognitive development of the young. Indirect air pollution effects here may be on issues of food insecurity and poverty status, may reduce the benefit of educational opportunities. Highly polluted environments may lead to short-term school closures. Efforts to reduce emissions and limit exposure can benefit the young, improving educational opportunities with less days lost due to pollution-related illness or school closure. So we see very direct benefits of air quality management and very direct impacts to quality education from air pollution, adverse impacts on 4. Gender equality we see as an indirect benefit from air quality management, but very direct impacts from air pollution that affect this goal. In low and middle income countries, women are more at risk from indoor air pollution, with the WHO estimating some 3 billion or more people cook using open fires or simple stoves with a variety of fuels. And around 4 million die prematurely from illnesses attributable to household air pollution due to the inefficient use of those fuels. So efforts to improve the emission performance of cooking practices will improve indoor air quality and improve health. So there's a direct impact of air pollution, but as air quality management is traditionally an ambient activity, this will have indirect benefits, even though there are very clear impacts on indoor air pollution from a change in cooking practices. Looking at clean water and sanitation, dry and wet deposition of acidifying sulfur, nitrogen and other compounds will affect watercourses. Action to address sanitation can increase local bioaerosol and odor emissions from sewerage and wastewater, and of course from indirect emissions due to the energy demands for purification and sewerage. So we can see here that air pollution has a negative impact on this goal, but equally managing air quality in the ambient can provide direct benefits. Looking at SDG 7, renewable energy, we can see that traditional wood and coal fuels are associated with high levels of emissions. Waste burning in low-income countries can be a major unregulated source of pollution. Particularly, it is common for heat and cooking in such circumstances. The effectiveness of some types of renewable energy system can be affected by smog, dust, or haze, reducing the effectiveness of PV systems. But renewable sources of energy are quickly establishing themselves as cost-effective alternatives to fossil fuel, bringing significant public health benefits. So when we assess this one, we can see very direct benefits from managing air pollution through air quality management, but a disbenefit from pollution on this goal. If we look at decent work and economic growth, we would note that air pollution costs in high, middle and low income countries are significant. Direct healthcare impacts, productivity losses due to ill health or effects on the built environment are all significant. Loss of work due to ill health can have a negative impact on economic growth. Investment in new technologies with improved emission performance can bring new growth opportunities. Reducing the number of sick days attributable to air pollution can increase productivity. And so when we add together the positives and the negatives, we can again see air pollution as a negative impact on this goal, but there are indirect benefits through air quality management practices. Looking at SDG 9, industry, innovation and infrastructure, of course, this category brings major air pollution sources into consideration. We know that polluted environments find their corrosion of stone and metalwork increases with increased repair costs. Actual or perceived pollution can inhibit industrial, commercial or service location choices. Emission reduction programs can provide cost savings for a range of issues. But when we add up all of the issues that our Delphi process identified for SDG 9, it's very clear that air pollution is a barrier to SDG 9, but air quality management can provide indirect benefits for this goal. When we look at SDG 10, reduced inequalities, we know that sources and impacts of emission are very unequal, with the elderly, the poor, the young, and the already ill most at risk. We also know that across the world, the ability to measure air pollution is unequal, with developed nations more able to carry the cost of significant monitoring programs and management of pollutant risk. But reducing emissions and concentrations will lower exposure risk, particularly of those most sensitive in society, and reduce gross inequalities in health outcomes, and can provide a more attractive environment for inward investment and reduce the number of days lost due to ill health. And again, we're able to identify those who are living in poverty are least likely to be responsible for emissions, but will suffer disproportionately from the emissions of the well-off. Actions to reduce emissions here will have direct benefits, but pollution is a major barrier to the achievement of SDG 10. Looking to SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities, and now with the majority of the world's population living in cities, this one is particularly important. Air pollution can negatively affect the perception of a city and therefore reduce opportunities for investment. We can see air pollution reducing the use of outdoor space and restrict demand for and development and use of active travel infrastructure. But conversely, when you look at all of the opportunities provided by air quality management, we can see very direct benefits, but of course a range of disbenefits that air pollution brings and acts therefore as a barrier to SDG 11. Looking at responsible consumption and production, this is SDG 12. Consumption-driven economies demand industrial production, service provision, and logistics systems that create emissions, creating in turn air pollution problems within and beyond the consuming country. And outsourcing practices can lead to poor air quality in other regions and countries. Construction and demolition are major local sources of emission, particularly in rapidly developing cities. And the subsidies for fossil fuel perpetuate oil-based economic systems, resulting in air pollution impacts. So we can see here that, again, air pollution acts as a disbenefit, a barrier to achieving SDG 12, whereas managing air pollution can provide direct benefits, in turn mitigating local and transboundary air pollution impacts. SDG 13 is concerned with climate, and of course there is a direct impact. Fossil fuel combustion in industry, commerce, transport, agriculture, the home, etc. Major contributor to climate change, with impacts on health, security of food supplies, access to fresh water, and impacts on the marine environment. So emission mitigation will reduce the impact on the natural and human systems, but a changing climate may in turn lead to changes in energy demand, for example, air conditioning, unless those are powered by renewable sources. We may well see a changing climate creating new reaction chemistry and changes in the location of secondary pollutants such as ozone and volatile compounds, with dispersion patterns for pollutants potentially affected by changing climate patterns. So again, this is very clearly an SDG where air pollution acts as a barrier, but managing air quality can provide direct benefits. And the same is true for life below water, with marine and freshwater life at risk from acidification and eutrophication associated with releases from fuel combustion, but also diffuse pollution from agriculture and road runoff, etc. The accumulation of metals, microplastics, and persistent organic compounds in fresh and marine environments create risk to humans through the food chain, but also all of the life in the marine environment that depends upon that food chain. So again, we see very clear disbenefits from pollution and management action bringing direct benefits. The same is true for life on land, where actions to address this goal will mitigate local and transboundary air pollution issues. But air pollution remains a major barrier affecting vegetation from dry and wet deposition, from high level concentrations that are sourced from all of the things we've been talking about this morning. We also should note in passing that certain types of vegetation can be a natural source of emission for some organic compounds that contribute to a regional haze, but that's not a reason to chop down those forests. So what we see in 15 is air pollution again as a barrier to SDG 15 being attained, whereas managing air quality can bring direct benefits. Moving on to the last two, peace, justice and strong institutions, SDG 16. Air pollution's contribution to climate instability potentially results in reduced access to key resources, may lead to resource conflicts at local or international scale, and it may in turn in future lead to environmental refugee numbers. But policies to reduce emissions will help reduce the risk of such conflicts, and improving resource efficiency and minimizing emissions through consumption management could also be a significant benefit. We see air pollution as a barrier in this SDG, but managing air quality can bring direct benefits and improve environmental injustices. And finally, the goal 17, partnership for the goals. And in the introduction that Shiva gave, you did talk about the partnership role of the conference, the Air Quality Management Association, and the network. And that's a great example of partnership for the goals. Where there is a lack of partnership addressing air pollution and other issues, there is a policy gap and there is an action gap. But global, regional, national and local partnerships like the ones that you have through AQML help raise awareness, identify actions and implement change management processes that lead to better regulation of emissions and concentrations and promote behavior change. So again, where we pull together the evidence base, we see air pollution as a barrier, but also action on air quality management as a direct benefit for this goal, and providing opportunities for demonstrating partnership working in practice. And when you pull all of that together, you will see that for each of the 17 goals, air pollution is a barrier to achievement. But for 4 of the goals, air quality management practices create indirect benefits, enhancing the opportunity for attainment of the goal. For the other 13 goals, there are direct benefits to support attainment of the goal. You can visualize, so when viewed through the lens of the SDGs, we can say that air pollution directly affects each one of the goals and acts as a barrier to varying degrees to attain both an individual goal, but more importantly, to that suite of interconnected SDGs. Conversely, managing air quality can enable the attainment of the goals. And one of the things I should note at this point is in this presentation, I've used a slightly different terminology, direct and indirect, compared to our previous work where we talked about co-benefits. And I can give a lengthy spiel about that, which I won't do just now. Conscious of time, so I'll move quickly on through the other slides. This is just a simple visualization of air pollution as a constraint, air pollution as air quality management as an enabler of those goals, and the indirect enabler of just 4 of the goals. So this high-level analysis has considered air pollution as a barrier and air quality management as an enabler for the SDGs. Some can argue that the SDGs are merely a non-binding soft law framework with no proper enforcement and compliance mechanism. And that is true, but they are the only globally agreed consensual pathway to a more sustainable future. It might be unfortunate there's no goal that is labeled air quality, but as we've seen, air quality is intimately connected and enables attainment of each and every one of the goals. And we can think about this suite of goals. And that opportunity is about thinking in a much more systemic, integrated way. There's further research. I've only skimmed across the surface of this area. Further research to understand how policies to address the goals collectively, as well as at the individual goal level, can be devised and implemented to ensure air quality improvements are embedded in individual goals and target action plans. We need more research on the air pollution impacts and benefits. We need to address air quality management to mitigate local and transboundary air pollution. But commitments to meeting individual SDGs should not be at the expense of impacts of air pollution on other goals. And we need to think about the positive contribution of clean air to meeting the SDGs. I'm thinking, therefore, about what research might be required, and particularly for those thinking of new research topics, or if you're about to embark on your PhD. So research about the interconnectedness of the SDGs at a synoptic scale, examining how air pollution and air quality management are connected to each goal, extending the analysis to include the SDGs 169 targets, considering those trade-offs at goal and target level, and mapping the positive and negative interactions, leading to a quantification opportunity for the impact and management benefit of each goal and target. And finally, thinking about how the framework can contribute to impact assessment processes such as EIA, Strategic Environmental Assessment, and the many other impact assessments that exist. So that is my contribution to the Air Quality Management lecture series. Thank you very much for listening. I'll now stop sharing and hand back to Shiva.
Thank you very much, Professor Jim. It was an excellent talk, and we could able to relate how air quality and sustainable developmental goals can be interconnected. And many times we miss, because when you try to see that in sustainable developmental goals, there is no word which catches direct attention of any of the air quality researchers in any of the sustainable developmental goals, as you rightly said. So yeah, it was a wonderful talk. So before we start discussing, we thought we'll have one picture with you. So I request all of you to just have start your camera, then we will have discussion. Can you all quickly start your camera so we can have a quick picture? Okay, Saket or Swaroop, can you are you taking the picture? Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. So, Professor Jim, I think it's quite interesting to look at it. I mean, this is one question which always comes when I look at into sustainable developmental goals. So they discussed about all resources like air, water, except air. They discussed about water. They discussed about land, all other infrastructure. I don't know where air is not an infrastructure in an urban environment.
Yes, the urban environment is part of SDG 11, but the air pollution consequences of urban living are somewhat minimized within the framework of the SDGs. It's not made explicit as a major focus of the overall achievements of the goals, and I think that is somewhat unfortunate, because the WHO is very clear about the world's largest environmental health risk, and we need to bring that to the forefront of the SDGs, and for that to be part of the assessment processes that are that are necessary if we are to be fair and equitable in our progress towards a more sustainable future. You can't achieve the goals in the absence of fairness and equity. And the urban population is now the majority of the world population. We know that that will continue to increase as a share of global population. We also know that in some of those mega cities of the world where rapid urbanization is taking place, that there are some extreme examples of poverty, where the air pollution experience for those individuals living in poverty is amongst the most extreme. And action on all of those issues together is required. Air pollution is one of those problems and needs to be thought of as part of a package of solutions, not an individual activity on its own for its own. It's my reference to synoptic consideration, that system of the 17 goals, looking through, as my title said, looking through the lens of those goals, is a way for us to think constructively about the opportunities for change, but also to think about the negative consequences that we may have through that action on an individual goal. It may have ramifications across the system, and hence that point in some of the recommendations about thinking more carefully about the system and more carefully about the negative and positive impacts of change, and having clear mechanisms for articulating the necessary pragmatic trade-offs that have to come in policy implementation.
Yeah, thank you very much. So this is another, things which is always being discussed, because many countries and many regulatory agencies, they will all try to look at it policy framing in order to meet certain sustainable developmental goals. So anyway, they try to look at it, their more focus is towards the activities that directly associated with individual goals. And probably they will try to sideline this air pollution related issues. How do we address this, and maybe how do we learn? As you rightly said, maybe we should look at it, more in a very positive way, but still, when we try to look at it from the funding and implementation aspect, this will get sidelined.
You're absolutely right, Shiva. It does inevitably find itself being sidelined. But looking through this lens of the SDGs and being able to articulate the benefits across the set of goals provides one form of evidence to support policymakers in making decisions that aren't solely influenced by short-term financial considerations. We know the costs of air pollution are high. Direct costs and knock-on secondary costs are equally high. The short-term costs of air quality management is sometimes seen as a barrier when financial resources are limited, but actually it's often the accounting processes that are being used that is the problem. If we take a more holistic view of the benefits of air quality management practices and the benefits they bring across the range of the SDGs, then we will be in a more powerful position to argue for those actions. But as we stand, and is true in the United Kingdom as much as it is in other countries around the world, thinking about short-term costs, and they're almost inevitably, those short-term costs dominate the thinking for action, when what we want them to take is that much broader perspective And we need to argue why that matters, and we need to provide the evidence, and we need to present that in the right way for decision makers who are not expert in all of the areas that colleagues on this call and elsewhere will be. We need to present that in ways that they are able to understand and appreciate that short-term cost is absolutely necessary and will bring these longer term benefits across a range of different demands that we have expressed through the SDGs. So we need to get smarter at the arguments we present. We need to get smarter at helping policy makers understand the issues, and then to be able to take the right actions and to be able to support them in doing that.
Okay, thank you. So there are some couple of questions on the chat box. Do you think SDG goals, air pollution and NDC targets, CO2 targets, would align to lower middle income countries without necessary physical support from foreign funding bodies, especially transport, electrification and energy security?
So very simple answer. If you take the SDGs seriously and their approach that is about a more globally equal world, then the answer to that question is that the developed countries who have promised to support lower middle income countries in their transition to a less polluting future need to live up to the promises that they have made and the financial support that has been promised through numerous COP meetings, but it has not come at anything like the amount or the rate that is needed. So we will not meet the SDGs if we do not think about ways of minimizing global inequality. So
Okay.
absolutely, fiscal support from foreign funding bodies needs to ramp up to the level of the promise that has been made.
Okay, thank you. Then the next question is, should SLCP such as ozone, black carbon, brown carbon should be included in SDGs? They are posing a significant risk to the climate these days.
At the moment, the targets make no reference to these pollutants, and the indicators do not either. The indicators at best talk about PM. So in the next iteration of goals, targets and indicators, we need to see a broadening out of the air pollution considerations and the inclusion of those, not just the ones that are being suggested here, but also as we begin to move to a very different global climate, we may well start to see new reaction chemistries that we need to understand, to quantify and to assess the importance on health and the natural world. That's a lot of research work for others to undertake.
Okay. This is one more question. This is on co-benefits of air pollution reduction measures are often neglected. Do you think it is a high time to highlight the co-benefits and give them a same importance as direct benefits? And doing so, will it help in reaching the sustainable developmental goals sooner than later?
So short answer is yes. The slightly longer answer is about picking up a point I made earlier about air pollution scientists being smarter in the way they interact with policymakers to explain the direct benefits as well as the co-benefits, which may be less obvious to a policymaker, but nonetheless, when you aggregate all of the co-benefits that air quality management and emission reduction more generally can bring, they can be very significant co-benefit opportunities. So yes, both short and long answer there. Co-benefits. Go back to my research recommendations. Being able to quantify the positive and negative impacts on the SDGs may be a helpful way, and there will be numerous positive and negative impacts. There isn't just a single benefit or disbenefit. There are numerous and quite probably multi chain events that would need consideration. So again, there is huge opportunity for researchers undertaking PhD or major projects to look at how we begin that process. In some areas, quantification has been undertaken, but whether the metrics of quantification are the right ones is often a point of discussion. So for researchers in IIT, there are plenty of opportunities to explore this area, and I hope some will take up the opportunity to explore them.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Jim. One question, Professor Jim, this sustainable developmental goals, maybe as you try to look mentioned, looking at from the lenses of the sustainable developmental goals. Now we have a developed countries, middle income countries and low income countries, and regulatory agencies in these countries may look at in different ways. As a result, it may not giving the same benefits. If you try to see from the low income countries or middle income countries, probably, how do we address these challenges?
Again, this comes back to a combination of activities. The policymakers who are operating at a local or indeed at a national scale, how we interact with those individuals and how they interact within the forum that the United Nations provides for consideration of the SDGs. I mean, this is, when you think about the 17 goals, the 169 targets and the 230 something indicators, and the raft of different UN agencies that are involved in creating reports on progress towards the goals, and the different national and subnational entities that are involved in providing the data. Going back to one of the earlier questions, low and middle income countries will need support to develop capacities and capabilities to deliver on the assessment processes and the reporting processes. Clear role for universities in supporting those processes, in making sure the right questions are asked, that the workforce that can support that is properly trained and able to deliver the type of activity that provides the data that enables the assessment to be undertaken. But your basic premise is that in an unequal world, low and middle income countries will have many more challenges than high income countries in reporting progress and demonstrating their move towards attainment of the goals. And the UN Forum is the only one we have for enabling an interaction between high, low and middle income countries, and the transfer of resource that high income countries will have to undertake in order to move the world to that more sustainable place, one in which not only humans thrive and reach their full potential, but we do that in a way in which the natural world upon which we absolutely depend is able to thrive as well.
This is Jim. I would like to know, since you have a vast experience with policy making. So looking at, in the past, the air pollution issues, most of the acts were, designed, several decades back, the issues which were there. Now the issues were, when mostly the industrial issues have been addressed to some extent, but now the urban issues are coming up. And how do we look at it, the policy changes? Because I'm just trying to see that to some extent there are changes happens with standard, changing the standard values, but not in terms of policy aspects. So do you have, I would like to request your comments on this based on your experience.
It is a challenge. So air pollution scientists are inevitably very passionate about their discipline, and they are very happy to talk in the language of air pollution. But policymakers do not understand that language. There is a gap between our language and a policy language. And what we have to do is to be smarter in changing the language we use with policymakers. We need to understand their language, but we also need to be able to shape their understanding of the changing circumstances of urban air pollution and the future opportunities for control and management that exist. And unless we in universities and in the Air Quality Management Association and your other networks, unless we are able to make our case in a way that is understood by policymakers, and a case that demonstrates the broad benefits across all of the SDGs that action on air pollution can bring, well, we're going to fail if we don't learn how to make that communication in ways that the policymaker understands. So there's an action on us to be better science communicators. And that is the precursor to better policy outcomes. There are lots of other steps in that journey, but being able to make the case in the right way is the critical first step.
Thank you very much. And my last question, since you have mentioned about, you have come out with a very, interesting and very useful framework for urban air quality management several decades back. And it was quite useful in many countries in implementing air quality management. Now, considering now with an issues of hyper-urban, local, air quality management challenges, and you also mentioned about some insight and some inspirational, ideas for the young researchers. So, what could be the kind of research these young researchers should look at, bringing out this, connecting this framework? Maybe how they can develop to address this local, hyper-local, urban air quality issues?
So the first thing is to have a passion for science, a passion to make a contribution that is intellectually robust, but actually can have practical benefits as well. So you are concerned about air pollution and you want to make a difference. And the challenges in the hyperlocal and in the mega city environment for air pollution today, and the changes that inevitably will take place in an urban atmospheric environment in the future as the climate changes and as the morphology of that city changes, as the nature of the albedo of the city space changes, the vegetation changes. All of those things create enormous research opportunities, trying to understand ultimately the chemistry, physics, etc. of the atmosphere. But the practical benefits, this is about enhancing the livability of the city for its residents and for the natural world that is still part of that city. And ultimately, that's in my head what sustainable development is all about. But it needs talented young researchers and others to actually identify the challenges that exist before they became so pronounced, anticipatory air quality management, I think, will become ever more important. Let's not get to the point where we have major pollution problems of whatever nature they may be in the future. Let's use our collective wisdom to identify the risk that there may be those and avoid them in the best way possible.
Mr. Jim, thank you very much for sharing your vast experience and wisdom of thoughts on air quality management. It was highly beneficial for everyone who participated in this particular talk. And thank you very much. And I also thank all
you.
the, we'll also thank all the, participants who are attending this lecture. And thank you very much for all. And I hope this lecture is quite inspiring for all of you to, take it forward, your research and your professional work. Thank you very much. Professor Jim, thank you. I'll write back to you.